we are going to begin the funeral service for Mr. Medovoy. If you have a cell phone, I'd ask you kindly to place it in the silent mode or turn it completely off at this time. I'd also like to welcome anybody via live stream. On behalf of the family, thank you for attending as well. And services will be conducted by Rabbi Yitzchak Falk.
We begin with Psalm 15, Tehillim Tet Vav. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai, mi yagur ba'ohelecha, mi yishkon bahar kodshecha, holech tamim ufoel tzedek v'dover emet bilvavo, lo ragal al lishono, lo asa l'rehu ra'ah, v'cherpa lo nasa al krovo, nivzeh beinav nimas, Vet Yirav Adonai Yichabed. Nishba lahara v'lo yamir, kaspo lo notan beneshech, v'shochad al naki lo lakach, ose'ele lo yamot leolam. A song of David. Lord, who may sojourn in your tent? Who may dwell on your holy mountain? One who walks in purity, does what is righteous, and speaks the truth from the heart, who has no slander on the tongue, nor has done harm to a fellow, nor cast disgrace toward a neighbor, in whose eyes a contemptible person is repulsive, but who honors those who are in awe of the Lord, who swears truthfully even to personal hurt and never retracts, who does not lend money on interest, nor takes a bribe against the innocent. One who does these things shall never falter. Tehillim Chaf Gimel, Psalm 23. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai roi lo echsar, benodesha yarbitzeni al mei menuchot yinhaleni. Nafshi yishoveh v'yancheni b'magli tzedek laman shemo. Gam ki elech begates al mavet lo irara ki ata imadi. Shivtecha u'mishantecha hema yenachamuni, taroch lefanai shochan neged zerurai. Dishanta v'shemen roshi kosi rivaya. Ach, tov v'chesed yirdefuni kol yemei chayai. V'shafti beveit Adonai liorech yamim. A song of David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not lack. God causes me to lie down in lush pastures. God leads me beside tranquil waters. God restores my soul and guides me in righteous paths for God's name's sake. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your scepter and staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in full view of my adversaries. You've anointed my head with oil, my cup overflows. May only goodness and kindness pursue me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord for the length of days. We are gathered today to give final honor and respect to Leonid Leib ben Shulam. We, of course, wish our deepest condolences to his wife Olga, his daughters Tanya and Jane, and their spouses Slavik and Eugene, to the grandchildren Sasha, Eva, and Ellie, and to the great grandson Asher. I'm going to call upon first Tanya to share a eulogy for Leonid.
Hello. Thank you, Rabbi Falk, for getting us started. Thank you guys for coming out, and thank you for all the text and messages, and very overwhelmed, and it really helps. We're trying to think on, what we want to say here. There was just so much. I could write pages, but I had to cut it down. So stick with me. I'm just going to read what we wrote, all of us together. Can you hear me well? My dad began his journey in a tiny city of Jalalabad in Kyrgyzstan in 1942 and completed it in Glenview, Illinois. Last night, I attempted to Google the distance between the two cities, and the response was, the distance is too long to calculate. 81 years of life is a long distance, but this distance can be measured with a scale of joy, laughter, and love. We called my dad Leonichka for years, so I'm just gonna use Leonichka a lot in my speech. He often shared the vivid memory of his family returning to Kiev in the fall of 1945. As a 3-year-old boy, he had an important role to play. He was safeguarding precious treasures, a huge sack of walnuts and another one of dry fruit. On the overcrowded train to Kiev, he was sleeping on top of the sacks. In case if anyone attempted to steal them, they would have to pull them out from underneath him, cause him to fall and make noise and wake everyone up. The treasures safely made it to Kiev, where his ingenious 4'8" mother, Rachel, successfully exchanged it for a coal and wood that kept them warm the entire winter. Leonichka and his older sister, Sofa, were growing up in a house full of people. Their cousins, whose parents perished during the war and Holocaust, would rotate between their dad's household and the orphanage, simply because there was just not enough food to feed the entire family. The life of that generation in the Soviet Union by no means could have been called easy, and the life of Soviet Jews was even harder. However, that's not how my dad defined his life. His life was full of joy and color. As the young child, Leonichka was often privileged to a bed near the Russian stove, the pechka, the warmest place in the house. Weddings and birthdays were held for the entire neighborhood. There were stories about the war, the camps, the prisons, a ton to learn from and get inspired. He was always surrounded by tons of boys who ran around and fought over everything. What can be more fun? A little detail, his nose was broken early on to cause sleep apnea for the rest of his life, but who would worry about that? His father, Shulam, was a shoemaker. And one of the corners of their overpopulated tiny house served as a shoe repair shop. There were constantly people at the door dropping off and picking up shoes. His parents spoke Yiddish at home, Russian was the language of the street, and his school was all in Ukrainian. His life was a multicultural and multilingual adventure. That's how my dad saw his life. He never complained about anything because in his mind, there was nothing to complain about. He had an innate optimism and positivity, and nothing could change that. He truly only saw positive things in everything. I remember ever since we were small, my dad was teaching us to do everything and anything. He taught us how to iron, and I still love doing that. So if anyone need ironing, we learned how to sew up holes in the socks and how to sew white lace collar on the school uniform, воротнички, if everyone remembers. We were washing the windows together in preparation for the May 1st holiday. We played ping pong and hiked in the summer. We were cross-country skiing and ice skating in the winter, played cards. We had an annual attendance at the art fair on Andreevsky Descent. Some of you who are from Kiev, Andreevsky Spusk. Every May, we were all going to see lilac bloom at the botanical gardens on the slopes of the river Dnieper. He didn't cook, but he had a few culinary secrets of his own as well. He invented a recipe of chocolate butter which was basically a mixture of cocoa powder and butter, but it was the best. He was making small wafers that could be used for dolce de leche cake, тортик со сгущенкой. He also perfected the recipe for his own coffee liquor, because if some of you remember, my parents at some point stopped getting their salaries, but they were getting a lot of spirit. And of course, the memorable grape moonshine, очень крепкая наливка, made of the grapes harvested from our own balcony. And, Kiev is not Tuscany by any means. It's not that easy to grow grapes on the balcony of the Soviet apartment. But he managed. Annually, we harvested grapes, tomatoes, and occasionally a few cucumbers. Cucumbers were the hottest, I don't know why. Every morning, he would wake us up to go to school, make us breakfast, and during the winter months, he would pre-warm our clothes on the radiator. Because why would I ever want to wear clothes that are not even warm yet? Even in my 30s, if my husband was out of town, my dad would call to wake me up to work. When my sister Zhenya was returning home late from her classes in college in Kiev, our papa would always meet her at the bus stop so they could walk home together. When Zhenya pleaded for him to stop doing it because maybe there were some nice guys on the bus who may want to walk her home, my dad responded, «Конечно, конечно, Женечка, я все понял. Я буду идти на 20 метров позади». We were absolutely spoiled and showered with his love, care, and positive attitude. If we couldn't figure something out, he would always say, «Ну, надо подумать». When my kids bring their problems to me, I respond, «Ну, надо подумать». After high school, my dad was trying to enter Kyiv National University. He tried not once, not twice, but 7 times. Even though he graduated high school with the gold medal, Kyiv National University in 1960s simply had no room for people of certain nationality and certain appearance. But his knowledge of math did not go to waste. When my sister couldn't solve her Calculus 3 problems, she could safely leave those for my dad. He would return home from the second shift around midnight to get started on the problems. By the way, the problems were due in the morning. Never once he failed. However, a few times Zhenya received homework back with the note, even though the answers are correct, the method of finding the solution is outdated. Your father's knowledge is superior, but next time, please attempt it on your own. When we were leaving for United States, it was customary to hold goodbye parties or so-called provody. You hold provody with your family, then friends, then neighbors. The final one was with my dad's co-workers. They were his colleagues of 32 years. Yeah, he worked for 32 years at the factory called Zavod Kommunist. As we were slaving over salad olivier in preparation for the party, I noticed that we had no desserts, and my dad had a terrible sweet tooth. Страшный сладкоежка. When I asked my parents where the dessert was, my dad responded by saying, «Не волнуйся, Танечка, до десерта дело не дойдет». And let me tell you, these people knew how to have fun. They were drinking vodka with fury and joy, and my dad led that festival. They had stories about him, and he had stories about them. I had never seen those people before, but I felt the sense of trust, the sense of loyalty, and camaraderie that they shared with my dad. They were missing him already, even though he was still sharing dinner with them. Needless to say, до десерта дело не дошло. Upon our arrival to Chicago, my dad was the first one who landed the job. He worked for the same company in Chicago for over 20 years, and he retired at the age of 76. He was a milling machine operator on CNC machines. When I was picking him up from his retirement party, his colleagues were hugging and kissing him. He never judged anyone for their lifestyles or their level of education, but in response to their work-related questions, he was quietly responding, "No nada pa думать," but this time it was in Spanish. Our first cousins, my dead nephews, Dima and Fima, Sofa's kids, and their families, they all now live in Israel. В субботу, когда я разговаривала с Фимой, он вспоминал, как в первом классе он отказывался делать уроки. Не потому, что он не знал как, а потому, что он ждал, когда Ленечка придет и сядет с ним делать уроки. Мой папа подарил мальчикам их первый фотоаппарат, часы, чинил их велосипеды, навещал их в армии, научил их драться, заниматься борьбой и всегда оставался с ними близок. Он научил Фиму его профессии и много раз навещал ребят в Израиле. I cannot help but say a few words about my parents' love for each other. They've been together for 56 years. They were close friends, lovers, and each other's biggest supporters. My mom was his queen. She could get away with the murder. It wouldn't matter to him. His love for my mom was unconditional and limitless. Some of you may know my mom's character traits are slightly different from my dad's. Sometimes she may get frustrated with a thing or two, but my dad could always find a way to diffuse the situation and turn it into a joke. All of us didn't just love Leonечка, we absolutely adored him. Просто обожали. And it brings us a great deal of joy to know that the same feelings were and will be shared by many, many people across distances too long to be calculated. Thank you so much. I think Ivachka would like to say.
Call Leonid's granddaughter, Eva, to say a few words.
That's hard to follow, but I just wanted to shed some light and share some stories about what an amazing grandpa Lonya was. So, from when I was younger, I always had memories of Lonya waking up at 5 a.m. every day to go to work, and he would accidentally wake Ola up along the way, and he would carry his old 90s-looking lunchbox to work. And after work in the summers, I remember he would always swim in the community pool to stay fit, and then he would eat a chocolate wafer Ola Pola bar, which he would always bring to our house, like pounds of these wafers. And I would always take those wafer bars to school for lunch, and all my friends would ask me, "Where did you get these Russian wafer bars?" And Luanya was always, like my mom said, very active and motivated, and always had a very strong zest for life. And he always watched us when we were little, and his favorite line to say to my sister Anna and I was always, "Ну, один тапки, то ты сейчас заболеешь." And we would always laugh at him and continue to run around barefoot. Also, a fond memory that my grandma likes to talk about is when I was a baby, I used to play, as you can see, with Leonya's mustache, and I would call it his usi and brush them for him. And the one thing that I really admired about my grandpa was not only what an amazing dad he was to my mom and aunt, but also, like my mom said, how much he loved and admired my grandma. And I have too many memories of my grandma getting a little annoyed with Leonya and him putting his hands up and making this face and saying, "Olechka, остановись, остановись." Yeah, obviously we really love him. Just wanted to share a few stories.
Yeah, I mean,
My mom's friend wanted to say a few words.
a friend of the family, Mila, would like to say a few words.
I just wanted to mention, we don't have any rules, so if anyone wants to say.
Я знаю Фэмили, эту семью очень давно, практически мы одновременно эмигрировали, с тех пор мы дружим. Вот как сказала Таня, для Лёни было наиболее характерной чертой it's trust and loyalty. Loyalty to his family, his wife, his daughters, his friends, to everybody. Как друг я могу сказать, что Леня всегда был такой вот тихий, спокойный. Иногда он говорил: Олечка, спокойно. Олечка была такая живая девушка, всегда и есть. А он ее всегда был как бы немножко тормозом. Меня всегда поражала в нем вот именно вот эта вот верность семье и друзьям. Это, в общем-то, далеко не каждой женщине довелось счастье иметь такого мужа. И что я могу сказать? Нам, конечно, очень грустно, что его уже нет. Но это было счастье, что мы его знали. Лично я скажу о себе. Было счастье для меня, что я его знала. Светлая память.
If there's anyone else who'd like to say a few words, you're invited at this moment. Okay. So I only met Leonid at the end of his life. I'm a hospice chaplain, but spoke quite a bit yesterday and before with the family about Leonid. And I was always looking to think about how do I frame a person's life in a Jewish context, and that the following Mishnah, teaching from Ethics of Our Fathers from Pirkei Avot, seemed to really capture Leonid the best. And that was, the following is from the second chapter of Ethics of Our Father, and it's in a section where Rabbi Yochanan, who is the leading rabbi of his generation, it enumerates 5 students that he has, and there's a whole section that talks about these 5 students. And in this section, Rabbi Yochanan asked the students, Amar lahem tzu ru'u ezohi derech yishara sheidbak ba ha'adam. He says, go out and see what is the straight path, the good path that a person should cling to. Meaning, how should one try to live life? What's the secret? What's the key? So the first student, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Ein Tova, that a person should have a good eye. A person should view other people favorably. This is the key trait that everything else should build off of. Rabbi Yoshua Omer, to be a chaver tov, to be a good friend, right? That's where you should start. Rabbi Yossi Omer, shechen tov, you should be a good neighbor, a wider scope of people, a little less intensive involvement than a friend, but focus on being a good neighbor, a good member of your community. Rabbi Shimon Omer, haro'eh et nolad. You should be a person who can anticipate the outcome of your actions, right? This is the most important quality. Then finally, Rabbi Elazar ben Arak, Omer, leiv tov, have a good heart. And then Rabbi Yochanan, the teacher, says to his 5 students, Amar lahem, ro'eh ani et divrei Elazar ben Arak midivrechem. I am choosing, right? You can imagine you got all 5 students. He says, he's the one who I think has got the best answer. I mean, the leiv tov, the good heart. And why is that? Shebechlal divarav divrechem. Because included in his explanation is all of your explanations. I mean, all the other things that we've said, to be a good friend, to be a good neighbor, to see people positively, to anticipate how your actions will affect other people. All of that all comes back to a leiv tov, to a good heart, which would be maybe a deeper place in a person. It's not just a specific way of relating or a specific type of action, but rather it's more inclusive of all of one's actions. And when Leonid's family was describing him, they said extremely positive, non-judgmental, found the good in everyone, kindness, zest for life, even in difficult circumstances, never had anything to complain about, very loved wherever he went, a very giving person, meaning lots of very, very good qualities. But I think all of them, in a sense, come back to a Lev Tov. It was deeply part of who he was, this quality. It wasn't just working on a certain aspect. It was an inclusive aspect that he was a person with a Lev Tov. He was someone who was able to relate very positively in a lot of different circumstances, whether it was at work, whether it was with the friends, whether it was in his community, whether with his children, his spouse, later his grandchildren. All of these, the Lev Tov came to play. And I think this is the quality, when we think about that, we can maybe most emulate, not just working on being a good person in one aspect, but being a good person in an inclusive way in all things that we're doing in our lives, and to deeply integrate that in our personalities and who we are. There's another aspect that his family brought up when talking about him, and that is how fiercely proud Leonid was of being Jewish. And while in general being an incredibly kind and giving person, he had no tolerance and was not willing to tolerate people saying slurs against him, and he taught his children as well to not allow anyone to disparage him, or teach also his children that they should never be disparaged for being Jewish, and that this pride, led him many times to have, say, confrontations with anti-Semites in his midst, but that his pride, something that was very deeply rooted in who he was, that he knew who he was as a Jew, and that in certain aspects, it really came forth. They shared with me that it was very difficult to obtain matzah in the former Soviet Union, that you had to line up by 5 a.m. At the synagogue, and that maybe eventually, if you did that many hours later, you'd get some matzah for Pesach, for Passover, and that's something that he would do, that there's certain key elements that he felt was very central to who he was as a person, as a Jew, that he, even in the most difficult circumstances, continued to try to follow. So I think that we, of course, extend our condolences to all of his family, but we can remember what an amazing life he led and what an incredibly good person he was in so many different ways, and how he was truly a person with a Lev Tov, with a good heart. At this point, if people could please rise, we're going to do the memorial prayer. I will do it in Hebrew and repeat it in English. El Melech Rachamim Shochein B'Meromim Amsei Menucha Nechona Kanfei Shechina B'Malot Kedoshim Utorim K'Zohar Rakia Mazhirim Et Nishmat Leib Ben Sholom Shalach Lo Lamo Bavor Shanachnu Mitpalim Ba'ad Haskarat Nishmato Began Eden Te Menuchato L'chein Bala Rachamim Yestereu B'Sitr Kanafav Lo Lamim Vitzor B'Torah Chaim Et Nishmato Adonai Hu Nachalato V'Yanuach B'Shalom Al Mishkavo V'Nomar Amen. God, full of compassion, who dwells on high, grant proper repose on the sheltering wings of your presence, in the lofty levels of the holy and pure, who shine as the brightness of the firmament unto the soul of Leib Ben Sholom, who has gone to his world, and for whose memory we pray. May his repose be in paradise, and may the Master of compassion bring him under the cover of God's wings, and bind his soul in the bond of life. May the Lord be his heritage, and may he repose on his resting place in peace. And let us respond, Amen.
This does conclude the service at the chapel. The family will be receiving condolences today beginning at 6 p.m. at Tanya and Slavic's residence, 1035 Butternut Lane in Northbrook, beginning at 6 p.m. That information is on your folders as well as our website. Interment will take place at Sunset Memorial Lawn Cemetery. That's 3100 Shermer Road in Northbrook. Please keep in mind a few safety features while in the procession if you're going. Put your bright headlights on, put your emergency blinkers on, attach the orange funeral sticker to the passenger portion of your front windshield, and we will also attach a flag to the roof of your car, and please stay as close as safety permits to the car in front of you. At this time, I would ask some of the gentlemen to please step forward to serve as pallbearers